The HOA built 28 condos on my land while I was in the hospital fighting for my life. They bulldozed the oak tree where I buried my wife's ashes and poured concrete right over it. The HOA president, Barbara, looked me dead in the eye and told me it was too late to do anything about it. But she made one fatal mistake. She had no idea that while she was busy building her little empire, I was busy finalizing my demolition plan. Where are you watching this story from? Let me know in the comments, because you're about to see justice served. And if you believe every homeowner deserves to fight back against a corrupt HOA, smash that subscribe button. You are not going to want to miss how this ends. That 5-acre parcel was more than just dirt and trees. It was the last piece of the old world my dad left me. Back in '83, he and I cleared it by hand, just the two of us with a chainsaw, an old Ford tractor, and a lot of sweat. I was 22, home from my first tour, and he was trying to teach me what it meant to build something that lasts. We left the big oak in the center on purpose. Dad said a piece of land isn't a home until it has a landmark, something you can see from a distance and know you're almost there. He passed away 10 years later, but every time I walked that land, I could still hear his voice telling me to watch for roots and to respect the slope of the earth. When I lost my Sarah, that oak tree was the only place that felt right. It stood strong and quiet, just like she did. We buried her ashes right there, beneath its roots, and I made a promise to her, out loud, that I'd build a little cabin on that spot one day. Nothing fancy, just a place for our daughter, Emily, and the grandkids to come and be quiet. A place where they could feel her presence, without the noise of the world getting in the way. For years, that's what it was. A promise waiting to be kept, fenced off, peaceful, and mine. The only trouble I ever had was with the new HOA that had sprung up next door, Heritage Point. The president was a woman named Barbara Kelso. She had the kind of polished look that made you check your wallet after you shook her hand. She'd approached me a few times about the parcel, calling it underutilized green space. She smiled and said things like, "You know, Mr. Carver, the original county survey maps from the '90s are a little fuzzy. There's a good chance this parcel was never properly recorded as separate from our common areas." I showed her the deed, clear as day, signed and stamped in 1968. She just shrugged, her smile never wavering. "Paperwork can be messy," she'd said. "We'll have our lawyers look into it for the community's sake." I didn't think much of it. She was a clipboard warrior, full of hot air and self-importance. I had a deed. End of story. Then my heart decided to throw a wrench in the works. A scare, the doctors called it. A wake-up call. I called it 3 weeks flat on my back in a hospital bed, staring at a ceiling and listening to machines beep. It gives a man a lot of time to think about what really matters. Emily and the grandkids. The cabin I still hadn't built. The promise to Sarah. Turns out, while I was thinking Barbara Kelso was acting, I got out of the hospital on a Tuesday morning. Emily wanted me to come stay with her, but I just needed to go home. More than that, I needed to see my land. I needed to stand under that oak and just breathe. I turned off the main road onto the dirt track that led to my parcel, and my stomach dropped. The fence was gone, not just down, but completely erased. In its place was a sea of mud, scarred with the tracks of heavy machinery, and rising out of the mud were the skeletons of buildings, 28 of them, from what I could count. 2-story wooden frames wrapped in plastic, sitting on fresh concrete foundations that were still curing. They were packed in tight, cheap-looking things that blocked out the Sunday. I slammed the truck into park and just stared, my heart hammering in my chest in a way that had nothing to do with the doctor's warnings. The oak tree, Sarah's tree, was gone. In its place was the corner foundation of what looked like Building C. They hadn't just cut it down. They'd ripped it out of the earth and poured concrete over its grave. I felt a coldness spread through me, a quiet, deep rage that pushed out the shock. I put the truck in gear and rolled slowly toward the new entrance they'd made. They'd even paved it. A freshly painted sign stood there, white with green lettering. Private property of the Heritage, Point HOA. Phase 4, Development. No trespassing. I got out of my truck, my legs feeling unsteady. I was still weak from the hospital, but I walked right past that sign. I didn't get 5 feet before 2 men in security uniforms stepped in front of me. One was a kid, barely old enough to shave, looking nervous. The other was older, with that retired cop look, all gut and cheap sunglasses. "Sorry, sir," the older one said, holding up a hand. "This is a restricted area. You can't be here." I looked past him at the half-finished condo, sitting on top of my wife's memory. I looked at the churned-up dirt that I had cleared with my own father. "This is my land," I said, my voice low and flat. The guard didn't blink. "Not according to our paperwork, sir. This is property of the HOA. You need to get back in your vehicle and leave." He put his hand on the canister of pepper spray on his belt, just a little tap to make sure I saw it. I stood there, locked out of my own legacy, a trespasser on the ground I owned, and all I could think about was that they built all this in 3 weeks. They built it fast, but they had no idea I could tear things down a hell of a lot faster. The next morning, I was on the phone with the county clerk's office before they'd even finished their coffee. The woman on the other end had a tired voice that told me she'd heard every story in the book. I explained the situation calmly, gave her my parcel number, and waited. The silence on the line stretched out as she typed. "Okay, Mr. Carver," she said finally. "I see your deed of ownership, recorded and clear. No sales, no liens, no transfers." I felt a small wave of relief. "So they have no right to be there," I said. "Well," she paused, and I could hear her clicking away again. "That's the tricky part. I see an intent to develop, filed by the Heritage Point HOA 3 months ago. They attached a plat map citing a boundary survey from 1997. A boundary survey from 1997? I remembered that. It was a dispute my dad had with the old rancher next door. A disagreement over 10 feet along the back fence line. We settled it with a handshake and never filed the new survey lines. They were using a 25-year-old clerical error as a loophole. That was never finalized, I told her. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice flat. "It's on file. They used it to claim the parcel was part of their common area expansion. The permit was fast-tracked. They didn't buy my land. They just told the county it was already theirs, and the county was too buried in paperwork to double-check. They were counting on me not noticing, or not being around to notice. My hospital stay wasn't a coincidence. It was an opportunity." That afternoon, Barbara Kelso herself called me. Her voice was smooth as butter, full of fake concern. "Mike, I was so sorry to hear about your health scare," she began. "And I'm even more sorry about this terrible misunderstanding with the Phase 4 development. There's been a simple paperwork mix-up. I just listened. We're having a community meeting tonight at the clubhouse," she continued. "I'd love for you to come, so we can clear this all up in front of the neighbors. We're all about transparency here. It was a trap, a public execution, but if I didn't show, she'd tell everyone I was hiding." "I'll be there," I said. The clubhouse was one of those sterile, beige rooms with bad lighting and folding chairs. It was packed. At least 40 people, all Heritage Point residents, all staring at me as I walked in. Barbara stood at the front, dressed in a sharp pantsuit, a picture of calm authority. Beside her sat Ann Rourke, another board member, who gave me a look of pity that was so fake it was almost impressive. Barbara started the meeting by talking about community values and rising property values. Then she turned to me. "And now, we have a chance to clear the air with Mr. Carver regarding the common area expansion." She gestured for me to speak, as if she were giving me a gift. I stood up, holding my original deed. "This land is not common area," I said, my voice steady. "It has been in my family for over 50 years. Here is the legal deed." I held it up. Barbara didn't even look at it. She gave the audience a sad, patient smile. "We appreciate you bringing that, Mike," she said, using my first name to sound familiar. "But as we've discovered, that deed references an outdated plat map. For years, that parcel has sat empty. You never maintained it. It became an eyesore, a liability." A few people in the crowd nodded. "The board acted in good faith to improve the community for everyone," she went on, her voice rising with righteousness. "We're creating beautiful new homes." A man in the front row, a clipboard warrior named Greg Sims, who I'd seen hassling people about their lawn ornaments, shouted, "It's about time someone cleaned that mess up." I looked from face to face. These people weren't my neighbors, but they had decided my fate. Barbara walked toward me, her smile hardening just a little. "Look, Mike, it's too late now. The concrete is poured. The investors have paid. What's done is done." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone in the first 5 rows could still hear. "Why don't we discuss a buyout? The board is prepared to be very generous to resolve this unfortunate situation." The whole room was silent, watching. She was offering me a bone to chew on after she'd stolen my whole damn farm. "A buyout?" I said, my voice quiet but clear. "You mean a bribe? You want to bribe me for the land you already stole?" A gasp went through the room. Barbara's face went white with fury, her mask of civility cracking. Ann Rourke clutched her pearls. People started murmuring, shouting. "He's threatening us!" someone yelled. It was over in a minute. I was shouted down, dismissed. I was the angry old man trying to stop progress. I walked out of that room feeling smaller than I had in my entire life. The humiliation was a physical weight. Emily was waiting for me in the parking lot. I saw the look on her face when I told her what happened. "Dad, just take the money," she pleaded, her eyes full of tears. "These people, they're a machine. They'll crush us in legal fees. We'll lose everything fighting them. Please, just let it go." Her words hurt more than anything Barbara Kelso could ever say. She was right to be scared. I was scared. On the table near the exit of the clubhouse, there was a stack of folders. Most were for the current Phase 4, but as I passed, I saw one that had slid off the pile. It was labeled in black marker, Phase 5 Expansion, Preliminary. Without thinking, I picked it up and tucked it under my arm as I walked out the door. No one noticed. Later that night, at home, I couldn't sleep. Emily's voice was ringing in my ears. "Sell it. Walk away." But the image of that concrete poured over Sarah's oak tree wouldn't leave me. I went out to the garage, the one place that was still just mine. It smelled of sawdust and old motor oil, a smell that always reminded me of my dad. I walked past the old workbench we'd built together, past shelves of keepsakes in dusty boxes. I reached the back wall and flipped on the harsh fluorescent light above my main workstation. It wasn't for woodworking. It was for my business. The light flickered on, illuminating stacks of demolition permits, blueprints for controlled implosions, and locked cases holding neatly arranged demo charges. They built it fast, but I tear things down faster. And looking at the Phase 5 map I'd taken, I saw their plans didn't just stop with my first parcel. They were planning to come for my other one across the road next. They thought they had cornered an old man. They didn't know they had just declared war on a demolition expert. After the humiliation at that meeting, I went quiet. I didn't call the county again. I didn't call Barbara Kelso. I didn't drive past the land. As far as they were concerned, I had crawled back under my rock, beaten. Emily was relieved. She thought I'd taken her advice and was preparing to take the buyout. I let her think that. In war, the most dangerous enemy is the one you stop watching. And every day that passed, Barbara Kelso was spending more of her investors' money, pouring more concrete, and digging herself a deeper hole. I was happy to let her keep digging. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. Lawyers are loud, they send letters, they announce their intentions. I needed quiet competence. I called Lena Brooks, Lena is a civil surveyor I'd worked with on a few complicated city jobs. She's all business, talks fast, and has a mind like a steel trap. She can read a plat map the way a priest reads scripture. I met her at a coffee shop far from my neighborhood and laid out my old deed and the fuzzy survey from '97 the HOA was using. She didn't say much, just took a sip of her black coffee and looked over the papers. "This is sloppy," she said, tapping the HOA's document. "They're hanging their entire legal claim on a preliminary sketch. They're either arrogant or stupid." "Both," I said. "Can you find me something solid?" She gave me a thin smile. "I'll do better. I'll find you the anchor." 2 days later she called. "Got it," she said. "Your dad and the county filed a utility easement back in '78. A main sewer line runs right under the eastern third of your parcel. It's a 20-foot wide right-of-way. It's on every official county map since then. They didn't just build on your land, Mike. They built 12 of those condos directly on top of a primary municipal sewer main. It was better than I could have hoped for. An easement isn't just a line on a paper. It's a no-build zone, protected by state and federal code. Blocking access to it isn't just a property dispute. It's a public health and safety violation. They hadn't just trespassed. They had created an unsafe, illegal structure. From a distance, I watched them build. I'd park my truck on a hill a half-mile away and watch through binoculars. They were moving fast, too fast. The crews were sloppy. They were using non-union labor, guys I'd never seen before. While they were hammering away, Barbara was waging her own war in the community newsletter. She published a glossy pamphlet with a picture of a smiling, generic family on the cover. "Heritage Point Phase 4, building a better tomorrow," it screamed. Inside, she called the development a testament to community spirit that would bring value to us all. She even had the nerve to thank me in print for my cooperation in resolving old boundary misunderstandings. Reading that, I felt a familiar cold anger, but I just folded the paper and put it away. It was evidence. One Saturday, I saw them bring in a backhoe near the spot where Sarah's oak had been. I watched as they dug a shallow pit and started dumping construction debris into it: broken concrete, twisted rebar, empty chemical buckets. They were using her memorial as their private landfill. That was the moment any thought of a quiet settlement, any thought of just getting my land back, died for good. They weren't just taking my property. They were trying to erase my history, my family, my wife. They were salting the earth. That evening, I made my next move. It was a small one, a test. My deed for the other parcel I owned across the road, the one they were planning for Phase 5, had a clause in it my father had insisted on 60 years ago. It granted him, and by extension me, exclusive use of the 20-foot wide dirt access road that connected the main road to both parcels. It was the same road their cement mixers and lumber trucks had been using for a month. The next morning, my foreman Randy Torres and I drove one of our flatbeds out there before dawn. We offloaded a dozen solid concrete traffic barriers and placed them right across the entrance to the access road, blocking it completely. We hung a 4-foot wide sign on them, professionally printed: "Private road, no trespassing. Right of access per deed, 477B. The call came at 7:05 a.m. It was the site supervisor, screaming into the phone that he had 5 cement trucks idling on the highway, burning fuel and costing him a fortune. I told him he was on a recorded line and he was trespassing on my access road. The line went quiet. Then he started cursing. They had to reroute everything, taking a winding back road that added 3 miles to every trip. It cost them time and money. It panicked them. More importantly, it sent a message: I knew the paperwork better than they did. That Friday, I went to the county permits office. I didn't go to the front counter where everyone lines up. I went around the back to the records department, a dusty basement room filled with filing cabinets and the smell of old paper. A guy named Frank has worked back there for 30 years. A few years ago, A water main break had flooded half the basement. My crew and I worked all weekend for him, for free, shoring up the walls and saving thousands of historical documents from being ruined. Frank never forgot it. I found him at his desk. "Mike," he said, shaking my hand. "What can I do for you?" I slid a form across his desk. It was an application for a demolition permit. Under address of structure, I'd written my parcel's number. Under reason for demolition, I wrote, "Unidentified unsafe structure erected without owner's consent, violating Municipal Code 11-2B. Construction over a designated utility easement." I pushed my business license across the desk. "It needs to be filed quietly, Frank." No flags. He read the application, then looked up at me, a slow understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew about the Heritage Point development. Everyone in the county did. He looked at the form again, then picked up his stamp. He pressed it down hard on the paper. The thud echoed in the quiet room. "Permit number 734, he said, writing it in the box. "It's active as of right now, good for 90 days. He didn't file it in the new projects tray. He walked it over to a deep cabinet marked Active Commercial Permits, MR, and slid it into a folder under my company's name, Ironclad Demo and Recovery. No one would see it unless they knew exactly where to look. I walked out of that basement and into the sunlight. The trap was set. The clock was ticking. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to finish building the thing I was going to tear down. Blocking the road was like poking a hornet's nest with a short stick. I knew Barbara Kelso wouldn't take it lying down, but I didn't expect her to send the law to my front door. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen with my grandkids, trying to teach them how to make pancakes for dinner because sometimes rules are meant to be broken. That's when the blue and red lights washed across the window. 2 sheriff's deputies were walking up my driveway. I met them on the porch. The older one had a tired, seen-it-all expression. "Michael Carver?" he asked. I nodded. "We've received a complaint from a Miss Barbara Kelso of the Heritage Point Homeowners Association," he said, consulting his notepad. "She's filed a report alleging threats and illegal surveillance." I didn't say a word. I just waited. "She claims you've been threatening her contractors and that you've set up cameras to monitor the construction site. Says you're intimidating her workers." I looked past them to the patrol car, where my 8-year-old granddaughter, Chloe, was peering through the screen door, her eyes wide with fear. "I haven't spoken to Miss Kelso or any of her workers since she held a public meeting to tell me she stole my land," I said, keeping my voice even. "As for surveillance, you're half right. I do have cameras, but I'm not the one doing the spying." I went inside, grabbed the tablet off the kitchen counter, and came back out. I'd installed a few security cameras around my property after I got home from the hospital. The kind that send an alert to your phone when they detect motion. I tapped the screen and played a video from the day before. The footage was crystal clear, showing a small drone, the expensive kind, lifting off from the Heritage Point clubhouse parking lot, flying directly over my house and hovering over my backyard for almost 10 minutes. The timestamp was visible in the corner. "That drone is registered to the Heritage Point HOA, I said. "It flew over my property, right over my granddaughter's swing set, without my permission. That's illegal surveillance, officer. And I'd consider it a form of intimidation. Wouldn't you?" The deputy watched the video, then looked back at his partner. His expression had shifted from tired to annoyed. He knew a messy civil dispute when he saw one, and he knew he was being used as a pawn. "We'll have a word with Miss Kelso about the drone," he said, closing his notepad. "Just try to keep things civil, Mr. Carver." They left, but the damage was done. Chloe ran to me and wrapped her arms around my legs. "Grandpa, why were the police here? Are you in trouble? How do you explain property law and corporate greed to a child?" "No, sweetie," I said, lifting her up. "Grandpa's not in trouble. There's just a misunderstanding with some of the neighbors." But then her older brother, Leo, asked the question that hit me like a physical blow. Are they the ones building on Grandma's tree? He asked, his voice small. Is that why they're mad? I couldn't answer. I just held them tight. That night, Emily came over. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in a week. The kids called me, Dad, she said, her voice shaking. They were terrified. Cops at your house? What were you thinking, blocking that road? I told you they would crush us. We were in the living room, but the room felt small, suffocating. They're not crushing us, Emily. They're breaking the law, and I'm pushing back. Pushing back? She cried, tears finally breaking free. Dad, they have lawyers and millions of dollars. We have you and a demolition company. They sent the cops here today. What happens tomorrow? Do they try to get you arrested? Do I have to explain to my kids that their grandpa is in jail because of some stupid piece of dirt? It's not stupid dirt, Emily, I said softly. It's your mother's resting place. It's your inheritance. I don't want it, she shouted, her voice raw with pain and fear. I don't want it if it means this. I can't keep doing this fight. I can't watch you go through this, and I can't let my kids be scared all the time. Please, Dad. For me, sell it. Take their money, and let's just be done. Sell the land, and come live with us. We can be a family again, without all this war. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled. This fight was costing her more than it was costing me. She was seeing her father, the one solid rock in her life, caught in a fight that looked impossible to win. I couldn't put her through that. Okay, I whispered. Okay, honey, I'll consider it. It felt like a betrayal to say it, but the relief that washed over her face was worth the lie. That night, I couldn't stay in the house. I drove out, parking again on that distant hill, the rain starting to fall, blurring the world through my windshield. The construction site was lit up with harsh floodlights, a crew working late under the cover of darkness. They were pouring the last of the big concrete slabs, the ones that covered the middle of the property. I watched a cement truck back up, its chute swinging over the exact spot where the stump of the old oak tree used to be. The gray sludge poured out, filling the last patch of open earth, burying everything forever. They were literally cementing their victory. Tacked to a utility pole near the new entrance was a large, weatherproof banner. Even through the rain, I could read the words. Heritage Point, Phase 4, Grand Opening and Ribbon Cutting Ceremony. Next Friday, 10 a.m. Join us in celebrating the future. They were going to throw a party on her grave. They were going to smile for the cameras and celebrate their crime in broad daylight. A cold, calm certainty settled over me. Emily thought I was fighting for dirt. But this was about memory. It was about a promise. It was about right and wrong. And in the dark, with the rain streaming down my face, I smiled. I pulled out my phone and dialed Randy's number. He answered on the first ring. Boss, I need the crew ready, I said, my voice as steady as the rain. Friday morning, quiet load-in. No logos on the trucks. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then I heard the quiet satisfaction in his voice. You got it, boss. Just tell us when and where. I hung up the phone. The future was coming, all right, just not the one they were celebrating. That Friday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day people pay good money for. By 9:30 a.m., the entrance to the new condo development was a circus. Barbara Kelso had pulled out all the stops. There were balloons tied to the Heritage Point sign, a podium with a microphone, and even a table with complimentary coffee and pastries. A crowd of about 60 people had gathered. HOA board members, a few nervous-looking investors in cheap suits, and residents who'd been promised this project would send their property values to the moon. A couple of local news vans were there, cameras pointed at the giant vinyl banner that stretched between two unfinished buildings. Heritage Point Phase 4. The future starts here. It was all a perfectly staged piece of theater. My crew and I had been in position since dawn, Randy had staged our heaviest equipment, 2 bulldozers and a large excavator, in the wooded lot behind the development, completely hidden from view. My crew, 6 of my most trusted guys, had parked their unmarked work trucks a quarter-mile down the road and walked in. They were dressed in plain work clothes, blending in with the construction workers who were still putting the final touches on the model unit. I sat in my truck, parked on that same hill overlooking the scene, and I waited. At exactly 10 a.m., Barbara Kelso, dressed in a victory red power suit, stepped up to the microphone. She beamed at the crowd, her voice oozing pride. She talked about vision, community, and overcoming obstacles. She thanked the board, the builders, the investors. She even had the gall to mention the generous cooperation of the previous landowner. She was painting herself as a hero. At 10:15 a.m., as she was winding up for her big finish, I gave Randy the signal. A low rumbling started, barely audible at first, but growing steadily louder. It was the sound of diesel engines turning over. People in the crowd started to look around, confused. Barbara tried to talk over it, raising her voice, but the rumbling grew into a deep, earth-shaking growl. Then, from behind the model condo, the blade of a bulldozer appeared, pushing through the flimsy temporary fencing like it was made of toothpicks. A second dozer followed, rolling out from the tree line on the other side. They moved slowly, deliberately, taking up positions at opposite ends of the development. The crowd fell silent. The news cameras, which had been focused on Barbara, now swiveled to face the machines. The party was over. I put my truck in gear and drove down the access road, stopping just behind the news vans. I got out and walked calmly toward the podium. I wasn't wearing a suit. I was in my work uniform, steel-toed boots, heavy denim pants, and a dark blue shirt with the ironclad Demo and Recovery logo stitched over the pocket. It was the first time they had ever seen my company's name. Barbara stared at me, her perfect smile frozen on her face, confusion warring with fury in her eyes. The crowd parted as I walked through them. I stepped up onto the grass next to the podium and took the microphone from her hand. She was so shocked she didn't even resist. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and clear through the speaker system. The rumbling of the engines idled down to a low hum. Every eye was on me. "My name is Mike Carver. I am the owner of this land. You are all trespassing." A wave of murmurs and gasps went through the crowd. Barbara found her voice. "What is the meaning of this? Security! Remove this man!" Greg Sims, the clipboard warrior, started puffing his chest out to move toward me. But Randy, a man twice his size, stepped quietly in front of him and just shook his head. Greg stopped dead in his tracks. I ignored them. "You built this development on land you do not own," I said, looking directly at Barbara. "You did it without a legal deed, using a fraudulent plat map, and in direct violation of county and state safety codes. As of 8 a.m. this morning, this entire site has been condemned. This is now an active demolition site. For your own safety, I need you all to step back behind the main gate." I pulled a folded document from my pocket and handed it to Barbara. It was a court-ordered injunction, signed by a judge less than 3 hours earlier. It verified my ownership, voided the HOA's permits, and authorized the immediate demolition of all uninspected and illegal structures on the property. Lena, my surveyor, had filed it as an emergency motion, citing the extreme public safety risk of building over a main sewer line. Barbara's hands were shaking as she read it. Her face, which had been flushed with triumph, was now the color of ash. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can," I said, "and I am." I gave a hand signal to my crew. One of my guys climbed into the cab of the excavator, fired up the engine, and swung the machine's long arm toward the model unit, the very building they were about to cut the ribbon on. With a crunch of tearing wood and shattering glass, the excavator's bucket punched a hole right through the second-story wall. Siding splintered. Drywall exploded outward. People screamed and scrambled backward, a wave of panic sweeping through the crowd. Barbara lunged for the microphone. "Stop! This is insane! This is destruction of property!" "It's not your property," I said calmly. I held up another document, a large, laminated copy of Lena's new survey map, with the sewer easement highlighted in bright red, running directly under 12 of her precious condos. I held it next to a copy of the fake, blurry map she had filed with the county. The difference was stark, undeniable. "You lied," I said, my voice booming over the speakers for everyone to hear. "You lied to the county. You lied to your investors. And you lied to every single person here. You built a monument to your own greed on a foundation of lies." The news cameras were rolling, capturing every second. The investors were huddled together, staring at the injunction in Barbara's hand. The residents were looking at her not with admiration, but with dawning horror and betrayal. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I looked from the wreckage of her condo to the wreckage of her reputation. "No," I said, "but you are." Barbara Kelso was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are always the most dangerous. She didn't retreat. She doubled down. The footage from the ribbon-cutting ceremony hit the local news that night, but the story was a mess of conflicting reports. Barbara had gone on a media offensive, leaking her own version of events to a friendly blogger and a small radio station. The narrative she spun was masterful in its deception. Grieving veteran goes rogue, destroys affordable housing development in zoning dispute. She painted me as an unstable, violent man holding the community hostage. She conveniently left out the forged documents, the illegal construction, and the fact that she was the one who had started the entire war. But lies have short legs. Her first mistake was trying to fight me on my own turf, equipment and property law. She had her HOA lawyers file an emergency stop work order, claiming my demolition equipment was trespassing on HOA property. They even forged a backdated lien document against my bulldozers. It was a desperate, sloppy move. My lawyer, a quiet but ruthless man who specialized in construction law, dismantled their claim in less than 20 minutes in front of a judge. He presented my deed and the court-ordered injunction. The judge took one look at their flimsy, misspelled lien and not only threw it out, but fined the HOA's lawyer for filing a frivolous motion. Strike one. Her next move was even more reckless. The city was in full panic mode over the sewer easement violation. They had sent their own chief inspector out to the site. We found out later that Barbara and Ann Rourke, her pearl-clutching sidekick on the board, met the inspector in his car half a mile from the site and tried to hand him a thick envelope full of cash. The inspector, a 20-year veteran of the department who had seen every trick in the book, simply recorded the conversation on his phone, took the envelope as evidence, and drove straight to the district attorney's office. An official investigation for bribery of a public official was opened against them. Strike two. The final, fatal mistake was all hers. She became obsessed with proving I was harassing her. She needed a victim narrative, and she was determined to create one. One night, around 2 a.m., the motion sensors on my home security system lit up my phone. I watched the live feed from my bed. A dark figure was creeping around the side of my house, heading for my detached garage. They were dressed in all black, a hoodie pulled up over their head. I zoomed in, and my blood ran cold. It was Barbara. She was trying to plant something, get some kind of proof that I was a threat. She didn't know that my cameras recorded high-definition video and audio. She also didn't know that after the first time the deputies visited my house, I'd shared my security system's live feed with the local sheriff's department. As she fumbled with something near my garage window, 2 patrol cars pulled silently into my driveway, their lights off. They caught her red-handed. When they searched her purse, they found a small voice-activated recorder and a handful of zip ties. In her car, they found printed copies of my daughter's work schedule and my grandkids' school address. She wasn't just trespassing. She was planning something truly sick. She had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. Strike 3. The bribery charge and the arrest for trespassing and stalking triggered an emergency meeting of the Heritage Point HOA. The investors had pulled out. The city had hit them with millions in fines. And now their president was facing multiple felony charges. The community room was packed again. But this time, the atmosphere wasn't a public execution. It was a mutiny. I was invited to speak. And this time, Emily was sitting in the front row right beside me, her hand holding mine. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to show them maps. I just played them a recording. It was a phone call between Barbara and her head contractor that a very unhappy, unpaid subcontractor had been kind enough to provide me. On the recording, Barbara's voice was sharp and clear. "I don't care about the old surveys or the easement," she said. "If we wait for all the legal nonsense, we'll lose the land. Just build now. Apologize later. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission." A dead silence fell over the room. The lie was exposed, stripped bare for all to see. Ann Rourke began to sob quietly. Greg Sims looked at the floor, his fake authority completely gone. One by one, the other board members stood up and announced their immediate resignation. Within 20 minutes, the remaining residents voted unanimously to dissolve the Heritage Point Homeowners Association entirely. Barbara was forced to resign right there, on the spot, as she was being escorted from the building by a security guard hired by the now former board. The local news crew, who had been waiting outside, caught it all on camera. They played the footage on the 11 o'clock news, right alongside a clip of her being led away from my house in handcuffs. Her empire of lies and intimidation had crumbled to dust in a single evening. Later that night, I drove home the long way, passing the wreckage of the condos. My crew had been working steadily for a week, dismantling them piece by piece. The twisted frames stood like skeletons against the moonlight. I stopped the truck at the spot where the old oak had been. The concrete was gone now, replaced by a deep, clean hole in the rich earth. "Now she can rest," I said to the quiet night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the heavy weight lift from my shoulders. It was finally over. The land was quiet again. It was mine. The dust settled, both literally and figuratively. Over the next few weeks, my crew and I methodically dismantled the skeletons of those 28 condos. We didn't just knock them down. We broke them apart, separated the materials for recycling, and hauled every last splinter and scrap of concrete away. When we were done, the land was bare again, churned up but clean. The air smelled of earth, not of cheap lumber and curing chemicals. The silence was the most profound change. The constant noise of generators, nail guns, and shouting men was replaced by the rustle of wind in the surrounding trees. It was the same quiet I remembered from when my dad and I first walked this land. A month after Barbara Kelso's world came crashing down, we held a small ceremony. I'd bought a young oak tree, about 10 feet tall, and with Randy's help, we planted it in the exact spot where the old one had stood. Emily and the grandkids were there. It was just the 5 of us. We each shoveled a bit of dirt around the roots. Chloe, my granddaughter, placed a smooth, gray stone she'd painted with a smiley face at the base of the trunk. There were no long speeches. I just told the kids, "This is where Grandma Sarah rests. This tree will watch over her, and it will watch over us." Emily hugged me, her grip tight. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. "You brought her back." The legal fallout was messy, but not for me. The city, facing a massive lawsuit for their gross negligence in permitting, offered a settlement out of court. Their lawyers tried to start the negotiation low, but my attorney just slid a single piece of paper across the table. The bill from my company for the demolition and site cleanup. They paid it in full, plus a significant sum for damages. It was a lot of money, more than I'd ever seen in one place. Emily thought we should use it to take a long vacation, to finally relax, but it felt wrong. It was blood money, born from disrespect and greed. The following week, I walked into the local community college's trade school program. It's a good school, but they're always struggling for funding for new equipment. I wrote them a check for the entire settlement amount to establish a scholarship and an equipment fund. It was named the Sarah Carver Memorial Grant for Skilled Trades. She'd always believed that the people who build things with their hands are the backbone of the world. Now, her name would help build the next generation of them. The county, embarrassed and under pressure, moved quickly. They redrew the official zoning maps, making the boundaries of my parcels so ironclad that no lawyer could ever find a loophole in them again. They also passed a new ordinance, informally called the Carver Rule, that barred any HOA from acquiring or developing land adjacent to its property without a public review and a sign-off from every single neighboring landowner. The Heritage Point HOA was gone, but the scar it left on the community forced a change for the better. The residents, freed from the monthly dues and the constant threat of fines for having the wrong color mailbox, did something remarkable. They started talking to each other. A group of them organized a volunteer neighborhood watch. No rules, no fines, just neighbors looking out for one another. A man named David, who had been on the HOA board and had sat silently through my public humiliation, came to my house one afternoon. He stood on my porch, hat in his hands, looking at the ground. "Mr. Carver," he said, his voice quiet, "I just wanted to apologize. We got caught up in it." Barbara made everything sound so official, so necessary. He finally looked up at me, his eyes full of genuine regret. "We just wanted it to feel safe, organized. You showed us what safe really means. It's not about rules. It's about having good neighbors you can count on." I just nodded and shook his hand. It was the end of the war. That spring, Emily and I broke ground on the cabin. It wasn't a big affair. I hired a couple of Randy's guys on the weekends, but mostly it was just me, Emily, and the kids. I taught Leo how to frame a wall, and Chloe how to use a level. Emily, who had been so afraid of this fight, was the one drawing up the plans and picking out the windows. She had found a strength in herself she never knew she had. We built it slow, with no deadlines. We built it right. It was a small, simple cabin with a wide porch that faced the new oak tree. By the time summer rolled around, it was finished. One evening, I sat on that porch in a rocking chair my dad had made, watching the sunset behind the trees. Emily came and sat in the chair next to me. The grandkids were inside, arguing over a board game. The light was soft, the air was warm, and the land was at peace. It was finally the home I had promised her it would be. "It's beautiful, Dad," Emily said softly. I looked over at the young oak, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze, a silent guardian watching over our family. I promised her this land would stay ours, and now it always will.